Hey everyone, welcome back. Today's video is about how I got a job after coding bootcamp. So I'm going to tell a little bit of my story and then try and extract some principles from that story that you can hopefully apply to your own job search. Most of my advice is going to be drawn from my own story and experiences, but it's also colored by a ton of students that I've worked with. So I've worked with a lot of coding bootcamp students, and I feel like I have a sense for what has worked for people and what hasn't, and I hope it works for you as well. Okay, so here's the story. I started coding bootcamp over 5 years ago now with no network in the tech industry. When I started, I was as concerned about getting a job as I was about completing the bootcamp, and we could debate about whether or not that's actually good, but for better or worse, it was really on my mind, mostly because I'd taken a loan to do this program and I knew it was going to be important to get a job in order to pay the loan back. So the first thing I did was I networked alongside of doing the bootcamp itself, which most people didn't do because it was an intensive program, 12 weeks where we were basically just coding all day long. I was doing nothing but writing code and thinking about these assignments, but I still tried to make some time for networking. So the first thing I did was I knew there was someone that had gone to my college that was working as a tech recruiter, and so I reached out to this person and we met, and I kind of got introduced into their pipeline, which basically just meant that this person would send me opportunities as they arose and as they kind of made sense. Now, as a completely entry-level person, there wasn't a ton that made sense right off the bat, but it was still good just to start talking to people and to get a sense of the local market, what companies were there, what they were looking for, and just to make your name a little bit more known. So I would recommend doing this. I also went to some networking events. So there was a great organization in the city I was in at the time that had basically monthly networking events at a random local bar or whatever, where you would just come, get a drink and do the whole networking thing. By the way, I don't like the term networking. The way that we typically kind of use it makes it seem like you're just trying to get to know people so that you can ask for something from them later. So that's not really how I approach it. The way I approach it is just to have normal conversations and to try to be helpful, kind of like I do on this YouTube channel. Give things away for free, share knowledge, make connections where possible, with the hopes, but not the expectation that that could benefit me at some point down the line. So that's kind of how I approach the idea of networking. So I went to some of those events, and I also started going to meetups. And I wouldn't say that a whole lot came from either the networking events or the meetups, but I did meet a couple people at the meetups, including one person that became a good friend and kind of a mentor as I was starting my career. So there are really great opportunities out there if you put in some time during bootcamp. Now, when it got towards the end of the program, we started to think about final projects. So most coding bootcamps have kind of a capstone or a final project type of situation where you spend at least a couple weeks on that. And for my final project, I ended up working with a local startup in a situation that we ended up calling an internship, and that was really cool. And so basically what that meant was that I kind of worked with this startup to think about additional features that they wanted on their platform, and I used their API in my final project with a little bit of direction from them about what the feature set should be. So I wasn't building features for this startup on their primary platform, but my code was something that they could see absorbing at some point. And that was a really cool experience. I got formal experience for my resume, but I also got to see how professional software development was done really for the first time. And I got to learn from this company's lead developer, which was really cool. I wasn't paid, but kind of as a thank you, the founder of this company ended up making a few connections for me. And because I'd done a pretty good job, he felt confident about introing me to other companies that worked kind of in the same co-working space as this company. And that resulted in me actually getting an interview. Now, as I went along in the interview process with this new company, I got the sense that it wasn't going to be a good fit, but I think the point remains that doing an internship can be a really great way to A, not only get experience, but B, kind of expand your network, meet people, and hopefully get your name out there a little bit more in hopes of one day getting a job. So I would recommend an internship either during bootcamp or maybe immediately after if you can swing it while you're applying for full-time jobs. The third thing I did to kind of help my job search process while I was in bootcamp was I made my preferences known to those who could help me. So I had a great campus director for the bootcamp I went to, and she was really instrumental in a lot of people's kind of job search process. And I knew that I was really interested in working for a startup that happened to be across the street from where the bootcamp was. And I let that be known pretty much from day one. Now, this particular startup didn't have any real job postings at that point, but they ended up reaching out to my boot camp after we'd all graduated to ask if there was anybody that could take on some contract work. And because I'd made my preferences known to my campus director, she was able to say, hey, you should interview Peter. He's really interested in your company. And that's kind of what happened. So while I was applying for full-time jobs, I ended up doing some contract work at this startup. And it turned out when I was there that I realized I didn't actually want to work there long term. I wasn't getting to do web development necessarily. I was just writing scripts to kind of automate a bunch of processes that this company needed done. But it was still really good to A, see this company, and B, know that I didn't actually want to work there full-time before I ended up accepting a full-time job. And I had the option to stay there, but I knew it wasn't going to be a great fit long-term, and so I ended up just kind of sticking to my job search that I was already doing and trying to prioritize those opportunities. But I think the principle is make your preferences known to people who can help you, if that is particular companies or types of companies or whatever it may be, remote work, it really could be anything. If you have people in your corner that are willing to help you, then letting them know what you're looking for is going to be helpful to them as they try to help you. Okay, so now we're getting to the point of the story where I would say don't do what I did, and I'll talk a little bit after this about what I think people should do or kind of what the ideal scenario is. But I kind of called this part of the story the spray and pray, and this is really what you should avoid. So spray and pray is kind of where you're indiscriminately sending out job applications to all different kinds of companies, maybe different cities, maybe different kinds of roles, maybe even some stuff you're not that interested in, where you're really just concerned with getting a job and not as concerned with what kind of job it actually is. And so this is kind of what I fell into. So pretty much what I just described. I didn't really know. The tech market I was in was kind of small, definitely not as big as the market that I'm in right now. Obviously this was before the pandemic, so remote work was a whole lot less of an option, and I don't know that I would recommend it anyway for someone's first job. But all that aside, I think I just didn't have a clear vision for where I wanted to work, what kind of job that I wanted, and so I ended up just applying really broadly and not using the network that I had started to build in the market that I was in. And the reason I don't recommend that is because it makes things harder. It's really easy to get ignored as a potential candidate if you just apply electronically along with everybody else, especially as somebody that doesn't have any formal or much formal work experience in tech. It can be really easy to just kind of toss a resume in a pile. And so the way to counteract this is to make yourself stand out, which I was not doing at all. Thankfully, the network came to my rescue again. So what ended up happening was that the campus director from the campus of the bootcamp I went to that was here in Raleigh ended up posting a job that I applied to and ended up getting. I'm not sure quite how much the network came into play in terms of me getting the job, but it was definitely helpful in me hearing about the opportunity to begin with. And thankfully, now I'm here, and this market is much bigger, and it's really great for technology actually. So my hope is that if I needed to look for another job, even being here would be kind of a big step up. But the principle still applies. Don't do the spray and pray. I don't think it's a good long-term viable solution, and I don't think the results it produces are actually that good for most people. So if you don't do the spray and pray, then what should the technique be? And so this is kind of where we get into a little bit of the ideal scenario. I know not everybody can expect the ideal scenario because maybe you have loans to pay back like I did, or you have dependents, or you just really need money to pay rent and you can't afford to take months and months on a job search. I totally get that, and I just wanted to get that out of the way now in saying that this is definitely an ideal scenario that not everybody can afford. So what is this ideal scenario? The ideal scenario is that you essentially narrow down the list of companies that you'd like to work for to 3 or 4, and you end up doing really targeted outreach. So you traverse LinkedIn, you find out who the decision makers are, you apply, but you also reach out before you apply and maybe after you apply. You go to great lengths to make yourself stand out. You emphasize what makes you different. You emphasize how much of a learner you are, which as an aside you should definitely do, because as a completely entry-level person, you kind of represent a bundle of risk. And you want to represent to companies that though you do represent some risk, that there's a lot of upside in hiring you as well. And the best way to do that is by presenting yourself as a genuine learner. This is the ideal scenario, but it's definitely the harder scenario, because if you limit yourself to just a few companies, then it can feel like you're not making progress on your job search. And the easiest way to make progress is just to send out applications, because you feel like at least you're doing something. But as I mentioned, the results from just sending out a bunch of applications and not doing targeted outreach typically aren't that good. So if you can, be intentional, take your time, try to get to know some of the people that work at the companies you're interested in, get a sense for the culture, get a sense for if you'd be mentored or not, which you definitely want, and then try and make your decision about where you want to work and be extremely focused in your outreach and in your job search. So that's the ideal scenario, and that's my story. I hope you found this helpful. Please let me know if you have any questions. If you're still here, you'd probably like the rest of my channel, which focuses on software engineering and career development, so consider subscribing. Regardless, thanks so much for watching to the end. Remember, stay hungry, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one.